We're in France, in the mountains of Alsace. When France fell in 1940, the Nazis annexed Alsace and immediately built a camp. "22,000 people died here. Boris Pahor, now 106 years old, was there. He's the oldest known survivor of the concentration camps. 20 years after the war, he went back.
The pine forest, that dark green shield that concealed the bunker and barracks and oven. The door, strung with barbed wire, is closed, just as it used to be. Nothing has changed. Only the guards are missing in the towers. You still have to wait at the door. The only difference is that now a watchman emerges from a wooden hut, unlocks the door, and allows groups into his pitiless mountain corral.
It was the first camp to be discovered by the Western Allies in November 1944. The prisoners had only just been moved out. With the Allies came a Russian prince and British intelligence officer, Captain Yorka Galitzin. He collected evidence about the camp, but no one wanted to hear.
In winter, a lot died from swollen limbs due to the cold. The majority of deaths were caused by shooting. No one was allowed to talk about the camp.
But this man has told us just what it was like to be there. After going back to the camp, he wrote his extraordinary book, Necropolis, City of the Dead.
It's absurd, but I almost feel that the tourists can see the striped jacket wrapped around my shoulder and hear my wooden clogs crunch on the gravel. This is a sudden flash, the kind that confuses past and present.
This is his story. Boris Pahor now lives in Italy, overlooking the Bay of Trieste where he was born. But born a Slovenian, they would become a persecuted national minority in fascist Italy. It was from here that Boris was sent to the camps. Natzweiler was a relatively small camp, but one of the deadliest. Most people have never heard of it. Rather than Jews, it held mainly political prisoners, resistors to Nazism, like Boris. His story encapsulates so much of the history of Europe, but is still being played out today.
Tukaj je Alan, no to je veliki, ki vas je prišel pozdraviti in ki bi vas rad spoznal.
I want to say how much I admire what you write and what you have done throughout your life.
Ja bom nekaj gospodu povedati, da jaz sem davno izjavil, kolega še ni bila tukaj, da vsako leto se človek spominja žrtev pretekle vojne. Jaz samo to želim, vsako leto, ko cela Evropa slavi smrti, trpljenje, mora poleg Judov omenjati tudi taborišča nemška. Smo morali v taborišču delati, smo umirali od lakote, od dela. Noben taborišnik ni bil niti eno minuto brez dela.
We died of hunger, we died of work and of illness. Ma se bo usedel, jaz bom pa tle zraven, prav? Shall you sit down?
How did he survive?
A vam je vaš mali prst vas je rešil?
Moj prst se ga rešil, je bilo, da jaz sem šel k njemu in ta darovnik, ki je prišel obvezovati rane, mogoče polovico bloka, da vrste, ki je čakala, eni z nogo, eni z ritjo, eni s hrbtom, eni z glavo, eni z rokom. Čakaj, da bo on prevezal, ne? Ta zdravnik je bil primarij v Oslu, kot v žuri, ko so ga aretirali na Norveškem Nemci. Ko je prišla vrsta na mene, ne, on se je čudil, da jaz njemu odgovarjam po francosko.
Aha.
Kako si se ti navadil tako francosko, zato ker si Italijan? Jaz sem rekel, oprosti, najprej začnemo pri Italijanu. Jaz nisem Italijan, jaz sem Slovenec. Je rekel, ja, torej, če si Slovenec, tukaj imamo regiment Rusov, Poljakov in Slovence in Hrvate in Čehe. In torej tukaj te ljudi, verjetno ti jih razumeš bolje kot jaz. Jaz sem rekel, to prav gotovo. Jaz sem bil pri tem prevajalcu, pri tem Norvežanu. In so me naredili za bolničarja pri Triesti. Ravno tja, kaj je najhujše.
Kaj so umirali tudi od driske?
Kome? To se pravi, vsak, ki je imel neko delo, ki je lahko živel v notranjosti barake, je lahko upal, da bo to reševalo.
In Natzweiler, prisoners who were artists recorded the horrors of what they saw and experienced.
Zdaj so pišala pred mano.
I am standing before the gallows now, its wooden beak jutting greedily into the sky.
One of the artists even drew Boris.
Maybe it's just as well there was no camera in the camp. No movie screen could ever show the state of a man convinced that his neighbor just got a half finger more yellow liquid in his tin cup than he did. We all knew what the members of the work detail looked like when they were brought back to camp. The majority couldn't get down from the trucks themselves. When they were put on the ground, they would squat or lie until someone finally hauled them off to the showers. The Germans seemed to require a slow rhythm for their sadism. Tongs, clamped round the neck, were used on those who had stopped breathing to move them to the ovens.
Of the 52,000 people who passed through this camp, nearly half died.
The adult returns to the land of his childhood, only to discover how small the buildings of his memory really are, forgetting that he measured the world from Tom Thumb's perspective. But it wasn't in our childhood that we went up and down these stairs. Our helplessness was greater than a child's, for we lacked the advantage of innocence. Each of us, each day, calculated the distance between the ovens and his emaciated ribcage, his stick-like arms and legs.
Boris, a Slovenian, was born into a tolerant, multicultural Trieste on the brink of World War I.
And of course the Slovenians had their place, and it was that time they had the famous Narodni Dom, which was one of the biggest and most important community hall or community center. This was the image of a power of this community that was very important in Trieste.
But World War I ripped their world apart. Trieste became part of Italy. Mussolini and fascism soon followed. The Slovenians in Italy lost their lives and their language. It was a turning point for Boris and his family.
The Slovenian language was forbidden. Can you imagine that somebody takes away the right to speak your mother tongue?
For him, everything started the moment he realized that in entering class he had to abandon his maternal tongue. Like taking off dung-covered shoes so they don't dirty the parquet.
The Slovenians' home from home, their precious place, Narodni Dom, was burned down.
A group of black shirts, fascists, burned this Slovenian symbol. And of course, Boris Pahor was 7 at the time, and he could see this red burning building.
The building where our parents used to take us to see plays for children.
Konec sveta, gospa. Jaz nisem razumel, kaj je konec sveta, dobro. Ma koliko sem jaz razumel, kot fantek, ki ima 7 let, je zame to bil konec sveta. In sem tako sem ga povsem tudi jaz, kakih 15 let, bi rekel, živel. To je ena koma. Meni se je to vtisnilo v mozek, v spodnje, bi rekel, možgane, da jaz nisem hotel poslušati italijanske besede.
We were taught to expect only evil. Evil, thorough and apocalyptic. The child who was once caught in the panic of a crowd as he helplessly watched the flames had his vision of the future ruined forever.
He came again and again to this memory. He never really recovered from it till he put everything down in his novels. That's probably why all his novels are autobiographic.
Boris had to enlist in the army of the oppressor. It was 1940, World War II, and the Italian fascists were fighting alongside the Nazis. Boris was 26 years old.
He felt all the absurdity of his situation. He was going to be part of the armed forces of a state whose project was to destroy the identity of his people.
He came back from Italian army and he joined the community that organized the resistance. He was a partisan.
When Italy collapsed, Trieste fell into the hands of the Nazis. Now Boris was resisting them.
Preden so me aretirali, mogoče 2 tedna prej, sem pristopil k Narodnemu osvobodilnemu. Domov so me prišli iskat domobranci.
They had found leaflets that he had in fact written, but they couldn't prove it.
Niso mogli pogruntati, ker je bilo napisano na drugi stroj, ko so mi nekako sreče zamenjali 3 dni prej. Jaz sem imel tako kot to, ta je na Remington. Vse so prišli iskat na Trg Oberdan.
It was in this palace, with its arcades, that the Nazi secret police had installed itself. It was there that I was driven in an officer's open-top car in February 1944. For guests of my kind, there were underground places. concrete cells.
Zdaj so mi začeli prvi na lep način, kako da oni, če jaz bi bil človek, ki bi lahko igral dve igri hkrati, eno še njimi, eno s partizani. Ne? Ampak, ko je videl, da jaz nekako na to idejo, da predlagam neki sporazum, nisem prišel, je rekel, ja, mi je žal, ampak bo moral pa početi drugače začeti, ne. In začel z enim jermenom ali bičem z usnja, ne. En je šel na uno, na desno, en na levo in vsak svoj bič, ne, po tem mojem telesu, ne. Jaz sem kričal, ga ni vrigalo. Oni so imeli radio odprti in tako naprej. Ampak ni bilo hujšega, to se in zadnjo plat sem imel kot ena zebra, ko sem prišel spet v zapor in tako naprej. Saj me niso z elektriko, ne. Če bi imel z elektriko, kako so kakšnega drugega komunista, in sam ne vem, če bi znal molčati, ne.
The very worst was when the Nazis locked him for 24 hours in a cupboard.
Pa gotovo, da mi je bilo strah, da se bom zadušil, sem se bal jaz. Ni se duša. Če bi jaz zadušil, izgubil zavest in se najprej pribudil, grem na uni svet, nekaj. Bi vzeli ven mrtvega. Ampak v Dachau so me poslali. Hudo se je začelo takrat, ko smo prišli noti v ta velik prostor, ki je bila. Sneg je bil povsod, mraz je bil ne vem koliko pod ničlo, ne, jasno ne. So ti dali rdeč trikotnik, je bilo potem treba napisati, odkot si prišel, to se pravi. In potem pa to je številko tisto, ki je bila na mesti imena, pod tisti trikotnik. Na vrati so te vrli en par hlač, en jopič, par cokelj, ne. Ko si oblekel, je bilo, kako da si nah. Tisto, da je zeblo, kjerkoli si bil. Do postaje, potem so z vlakom nas peljali do Alzacije, smo se ustavili v kraju, ki se je imenoval St. Marijo Milj. Tukaj potem je začelo delo. Tračnice, ki so bile v predoru, smo morali s krampom in z lopato nekako vzeti iz mesta.
It was in Sainte-Marie that Boris did the damage to his finger that was to save his life in the camp where he went next and stayed the longest. Natzweiler. It was April 1944.
Je peljal kamion mene, in ki sem sedel na enem zaboju, ki je bil že en naš mrtev noter.
Yeah, this is it.
Kraj je lep, kakor v vseh planinah, ne, to je normalno, ne, da razlet je bil lep in tako naprej, ne, tudi. Ampak lakota je bila spet kakor ponavadi, ne. Prvo strah v Natzweileru, da si prišel v zgornji del taborišča, kjer so bila vešala tam, ne, da se to sprejela. In da si videl po stopnicah dol te barake. To so tudi ti povedali, tam spodaj je peč. Edini izhod je skozi dimnik. Takoj pri vhodu je bil prostor zelo širok. Mi so nas peljali v barako. In tam se je bilo treba sleči vse do nagega. In da so obrili glavo na balin, v koraku, pavzeho. Človek je bil brez vsake dlake na telesu. Ne, najprej smo šli pod prh.
Now streams of water are released from the shower heads, and a thicket of bodies jostles in the warmth. Arms scrubbing arms with hard soap. The body loves the countless warm tongues that lick it, and the memory of the night mountain air vanishes for a while. And we forget that beneath the shower room is an oven, and that night and day a stoker heaves human logs into it. Even if the bodies think that soon they might be used to heat the water, the pleasure offered by this wet warmth is not lessened.
So naredili taborišče smrti v Franciji in hudijo še smučari tudi. Se smučate, tudi danes hudijo. Vstope za avto, parking, ampak marsikdo gre prej pozavi taborišče in potem se smuča še tam.
What was once the ski resort's hotel became the Nazi officers' quarters. A local banker's house was requisitioned for the camp commandant. He had a swimming pool to relax in while the forced labourers staggered up the hill below. An architectural firm designed the camp. Prisoners built it.
On a choisi cet endroit. Cet endroit pour une raison toute simple. C'est qu'en fin 1940, un géologue SS qui s'appelait Bloomberg, il a trouvé à proximité ici une carrière de granit rose. Et Hitler cherchait des pierres.
Ni bil navaden kamen, ampak da je imel neko notranjo barvo tudi, ne vem. So zgradili palače tistega kamna.
Au début, on a fait venir les déportés pour la carrière de pierre. Plus tard, on réparait des moteurs d'avion pour l'industrie de guerre allemande.
And there was another reason for choosing the site.
Et qu'en bas, il y a une ligne de chemin de fer. Il n'y a pas de camp sans chemin de fer. Parce que ça permet d'amener le matériel classique, les baraques par exemple, mais ça permet aussi d'amener un autre matériel, qui est le matériel humain. Les hommes.
On winter days, they lose their balance inside the skidding wooden clogs. But the block leader shrieks furiously, "Move, move," as he drives the striped stick figures out of the barracks with his club, and they topple over one another.
When it was captured by the Allies, the conditions in the camp were documented by the British officer Captain Jurka Galitzine. Before the war, he had himself been a member of the Right Club, an anti-Semitic group with German sympathies. What he saw here opened his eyes.
As the camp began to fill up, the plan of the Nazis unfolded. This camp was to be a distributing and restocking center for slave labor, with the idea of working the prisoners to death. When a batch could work no more, they were sent back to be put out of their misery, and a new batch was sent up to replace them.
Dans un petit camp de concentration, on est tout le temps surveillé. Tout le monde voit tout le monde. En plus, c'est un camp qui est construit en pente. Quand on est en haut, on voit ce qui se passe en bas. Toute la journée, les détenus qui étaient mal nourris, qui étaient en mauvaise santé, qui étaient malades, ces détenus montent et descendent des escaliers. Et ils n'y arrivent pas.
The steps gripped me like a vision of a doomed Mexican ruin. On these steps, which bend at each terrace like great stone knees, we reverted to a pre-rational state. They loomed before us like a flight of stairs in a bell tower. Another reason it took us an eternity to reach the top was that our feet, though our legs were like sticks, had swollen into white, fleshy lumps. Under the clear, sunny sky, these images become implausible. I realize that our forced processions have moved into the unreal realm of the past forever. My memories, which shift inside me like algae when stagnant water is stirred.
To da človek ni mislil na krematorij, je skoraj bilo nemogoče, da ni mislil, kaj ga je imel pred sabo vse čas. Samo da je šel ven iz barake. Tisto, ki je dišalo po žganem, ki si mogel dihati, ali tudi nisi mogel reči, ne bom mislil na to, ker dihaš, ker si postal tudi ti en del tistega žganega.
Pour les détenus allemands, au moment de la détenu allemand qui mourait, il allait dans le four crématoire, on retirait les cendres et on prévenait la famille. On disait, voilà, votre fils est mort. Si vous voulez récupérer les cendres, c'est 50 Reichsmark ou 70 Reichsmark, vous avez le choix entre une urne en terre cuite ou une urne en métal. On vendait ça. Mais les autres, les cendres, on les gardait. Il y en a certaines qui servaient pour les jardins du commandant, parce qu'il lui fallait des fleurs.
Kramer, SS Hauptsturmführer, commandant of the camp, and so directly responsible for every crime.
Il lui fallait des fleurs. Il lui fallait un orchestre aussi.
Igrali so tudi v Natzweileru, godba so imeli povsod Nemci. Godba je bila, da te je spremljala, ko si šel delati v kamnolom. In godba te je prijela nazaj, zadovoljna, da si delal toliko ur, ne. Vse skupaj je bil lari parito, ne. Tudi tista godba, ne. So bili srečni na neki način, tisti, ki so z godbo nekako si reševali kruh, ne. Tako da niso hodili delati v kamnolom, ne.
The SS working in a camp, they had some parties, for example, for Hitler's birthday. And they also had a cinema in the camp to watch some movies. There is not a lot of entertainment on the mountains. That's why the commandant of the camp paid a lot of attention to the comfort and to the wellness of his men.
The group of tourists and tour guide approach, so I cross to the other side. They should be required to walk along the ledge down below on days when the terraces are in the grip of gloom, rain and raging wind. Rainwater splashes your bare ankles. But a wet death is less violent and tyrannical than an icy one, especially if you have to run to the showers in the middle of the night as part of the battle against lice and typhus.
Tifus je bil velik problem v taborišču, ne? Tifus. Ja, bolezen, driska.
Each one steps out so a man can examine his crotch. There is no pubic hair, the barber's razor has seen to that. But on the ends of each emerging hair there might be a few nits. It's as though each penis is illuminated for some new rite of adoration. Maybe it's just as well there was no camera in the camp. For who knows what people today might think of that herd of half-naked creatures, taking turns while the rest look on fearfully, incredulous that the member, exposed and withered, is the begetter of all the countless specimens of their two-legged breed. Today, these wizened creatures could be taken for a pack of dogs, trained through hunger to stand on their hind legs and sniff each other's parts.
In this camp, in all the concentration camps, animals were better treated than deportees. If you read the SS rules for dogs, it's totally crazy. They had to get food every day with meat, with a very specific number of calories. They had to get fresh water, and if a dog was getting sick, the SS had to call immediately the pet doctor, you know? And it's another very terrible contrast between the way of treating men in the camp and treating dogs.
Cel dan samo lakoto. Je bila bolj glavna misel tako ko na smrt, ne. Bi ti našel nekaj dan to usta. Il primo ministro, ko sem jaz imel pravico zaradi svojega prevajanja, ko so prišli iz dela, zvečer, lačni se razumeti, lahni smo veseli, cel dan in vsako uro.
All of us saw that slither of bread moving only towards himself. Even if a man gives no outward sign, the animal within silently opens its jaws and bares its claws.
I think food was most important weapon for the Nazis. And it was the case with Capo, who received one piece of bread more than the other deportees.
These senior prisoners, known as capos, were usually German and chosen from among the common criminals, e.g. murderers, or sexual perverts, e.g. sadists. They were allowed to beat up or strike fellow prisoners. If a capo were to kill another prisoner, it would be completely overlooked.
If a SS man shot deportees telling he was trying to escape, he received some more food, some more schnapps to drink, and sometimes a day of holiday because he shot someone.
Capos would push prisoners over a line they were forbidden to cross, and the guards would shoot them.
The SS man received some food, and the capo also.
I've reached the bottom now. 2 barracks here have been left untouched. One was for solitary confinement. Now, as I face the open cells and see the wooden horse on which the victim was stretched out, naked to the waist, in preparation for the lashes that would flay his back, I cannot pity him. It is as though I'm transfixed by the silence that gripped all the prisoners on the terraces. We didn't think of the punishment in store for the poor devil. What concerned us was his loneliness there, next to the building with the ovens.
In to so imeli ene dolge klešče, ki so bile dolge recimo pol metra, ne, s katerimi so oni tista telesa vlekli na eno stran. Zanimivo poznati človeka, ki si je izmislil, ne, klešče.
The voice explains that the long bent instrument hanging from the wall was used by the stoker to even out the ashes as they settled. The 4 large hooks that jut from the beams behind the oven, the voice goes on, were for secret hangings, while public hangings took place on a gallows that we will see when we return to the camp's upper level. So that's how they did it. I'd always thought that they hanged them from the shower heads.
Certain prisoners who were considered more dangerous or who had attempted to escape were designated NN. Nacht und Nebel.
Night and fog. They could be shot for the slightest misdemeanor.
Dva velika N na pleči.
2 big N's across your back, which meant you couldn't leave the camp. You were to stay and die within the territory demarcated by the barbed wire. Those symbolic words were taken from a Wagner opera. Nacht und Nebel gleich.
A bolniška smrt si šel skozi noč. Tisto, ko so se začeli megliti možgani, da nisi več razumel, da si živ, ne, zame na mrtvo pravzaprav, ne.
Another major category at Natzweiler were the gypsies, classified as both asocial and racially impure. The gypsies were experimented on with poison gas.
The prisoners were used unhesitatingly as human guinea pigs.
Šele ko sem videl prvega cigana.
When I saw a gypsy lying on the concrete floor of the washroom and puzzled at the bluish froth coming from his mouth, I realized what a fate we had escaped. I can still see one of them, gasping for air like an old asthmatic. Whenever I walked past his bunk, his thin, handsome face would follow me, though he knew I couldn't help. Perhaps he wanted me to experience his fate in all its futility and keep him company on his lonely journey. There's the guide beside me again with his explanations. This, as you see, is the dissecting table. A professor from the University of Strasbourg performed his vivisections and bacteriological experiments here. And he made a point of visiting the camp to observe the state of the deportees who received varying doses of gas in the gas chamber, some taking more, others less time to die.
That professor from the university the Nazis had taken over in Strasbourg was an anatomist. His name was August Hirt. He was a staunch Nazi.
You can almost see the rubber gloves and the refined hands that will soon pull them on. I think I would rather be standing in front of the oven than by that table with its yellowed tiles. The oven, for all its crudity, is cleaner. I never asked where the gas chamber was.
It was at Hirt's request to Commandant Kramer that the gas chamber was built. It was down by the officers' quarters, outside the compound, in a building that used to be the ski resort's dance hall. There were very few Jews in the camp. But in 1943, on the instructions of Himmler, the leader of the SS, 86 Jews were brought to Natzweiler from Auschwitz. They were selected by anthropologists and blood-tested first to be sure that they started out on their journey in good health. Commandant Kramer later testified to his role in what happened.
I received the 80 inmates who had to be killed, and I started to take them to the gas chamber. The first time, about 15 women. I told these women that they had to go to the disinfection chamber. And I did not tell them they were going to be asphyxiated. Helped by a few SS, I undressed them completely and pushed them into the gas chamber when they were completely naked. When I closed the door, they started to howl. I introduced a certain amount of cyanide salt in a funnel that was to the right of the observation window. I lit the inside of the chamber with a switch, and I observed what was going on inside. I have seen that these women continued to breathe for about half a minute, and then they fell on the floor. When I opened the door, I found that these women lay without life and that they were full of excrement.
Kramer, il vivait à côté dans la villa, il avait une piscine, il avait une femme, il avait des enfants, il allait au travail le matin, il rentrait le soir, il avait des invités, voilà. Donc tout ça, il y a un côté normal.
He put newspaper over the outer door to stop the gas leaking in.
A few days later, I have taken again to the gas chamber a certain quantity of women who were asphyxiated in the same way. Then again, a few days later, I have taken to the gas chamber about 50 men, maybe 55. I told the male nurses of the SS to put these bodies in a van the next morning so that they could be taken to the Anatomical Institute in Strasbourg. I did not know what Hirt was going to do with the bodies. I did not think to ask him.
Son idée, c'était de faire comme un musée zoologique d'une espèce disparue. Et il pensait qu'il n'y aurait sans doute plus de juifs après la guerre, et que son institut était le lieu de prédilection pour former une collection de squelettes de juifs. Donc on voulait les documenter scientifiquement, comme s'il s'agissait d'un groupe d'animaux qui allait disparaître.
Die ursprünglich geplante Skelettsammlung konnte nicht zugleich realisiert werden, weil die Macerationsmaschine nicht da war. Deswegen mussten sie die Leichen konservieren. Sie sind in Tanks in Werz eingelagert worden und sind dort geblieben bis zur Befreiung.
Ces 86, ça représente la totalité des 6 millions qui ont été gazés. Ces 86 sont le résumé de ces 6 millions. Et c'est en ça qu'ils sont extrêmement importants. Parce que l'objectif, c'était effectivement de dire, vous voyez, on vous en a gardé 86. Comme ça, vous verrez ce que c'était. Et grâce à nous, et vous pourrez nous dire merci, on vous en a débarrassé. Donc c'est terrifiant, mais ça a eu lieu ici.
But by the summer of 1944, there were signs that the war was coming to an end.
Some felt a new lease of life as the planes began flying overhead. The drone in the sky caused a mysterious shiver in the ribcage. It started, someone said, half in sleep. This'll get them out of bed in Munich.
The Allies were getting closer. Fighting was intense. In July 1944, 4 women, secret agents with Britain's SOE, were brought to the camp and executed. They were injected with poison, their bodies then burned in the oven. But it wasn't over. Soon after, a local resistance group planned to liberate the camp. They too were captured and shot.
The guide's calm voice accompanies me. This, he says, is the room where executions took place. Notice how the floor is gently sloped to allow the victim's blood to run off. 108 members of the Alsatian resistance perished in this room. I shoved my way to the door, annoyed by the crowd.
Just 2 days later, the Nazis fled the camp, dragging the prisoners with them.
They hung onto the steps and crawled up on all fours. Spindly water striders, scorched, knock-kneed spiders, as if each excruciating move was the last, in their effort to leave the place of evil.
It was 2 months later that the United States Army entered the camp, now empty of its prisoners. This is when Captain Galitzine came to the camp and began to research his report, which fell on deaf ears.
Many victims were probably shot as they were forced down these steps. Here in this room, the bodies were stacked and fed into a lift which led them up to the furnace.
The bodies of the 86 Jews were discovered in tanks at the Nazi University in Strasbourg.
August Hirt comprend que sa collection risque d'être mise aux mains des Alliés. Et donc il ordonne à ses assistants de découper les corps, d'enlever les matricules qui étaient tatoués sur les bras et d'incinérer les viscères, les corps, etc. Mais dans la précipitation, les assistants d'August Hirt n'ayant pas réussi à terminer leur macabre tâche.
Professor Hirt went into hiding and killed himself. But his death was not confirmed until 20 years later, in the 1960s, when the Israeli Secret Service had his body exhumed and conclusively identified him through his bones. Boris was sent back to Dachau, then to the camps at Dora and Harzungen. He ended up in Bergen-Belsen, where he was finally freed when the camp was liberated on the 15th of April 1945.
Kramer, camp commandant, is taken into custody.
Ironically, Kramer was there too. He was known as the Beast of Belsen for running this vast and deadly camp. He was arrested by the British Army and put on trial as a war criminal.
Most prominent of all, of course, the ex-commandant Kramer. The trial continues.
When asked about the 86, Kramer's excuse was, "I was brought up that way." He was found guilty and executed in December 1945. Boris made his way to Paris. Diagnosed with TB, he was sent to a sanatorium to recover.
Boris spent nearly a year and a half in that sanatorium outside Paris. And after all he'd been through, he found love. She was called Arlette. She was his nurse. In his own words, he said he had recovered la volonté de vivre, the wish to live.
They could help each other to live, even if only for a little while. "You have seen too much for human eyes," she said.
It took 60 years to discover the identity of the 86 Jews. Their tattooed numbers had been removed. Their names weren't listed. But someone in Hirt's department had secretly kept a record of the numbers. Nearly 30 years passed before the first number was put to a name. An Auschwitz survivor saw the number on a photograph taken in Strasbourg at the Liberation, and he linked it to a name.
War Menachem-Tafel. Das war die erste. Einer von 86. Dann hatte ich die zweite. 2 von 86. Frank Sachnowitz.
Now, with 2 names attached to 2 numbers, Dr. Lang hoped the Auschwitz archive could help him find the rest.
Und zwar ist es eine Liste, die ich aus Auschwitz bekommen habe, in dem zu den Nummern auch noch die Namen waren. Es sind alle 86 Namen drin enthalten. Ich habe dann daraus ersehen, woher diese Personen gekommen sind. Und das war für mich einer der ergreifendsten Momente überhaupt.
After the initial shock, we really came to understand what a gift it was that Dr. Lang was giving to us. We now knew exactly where our grandmother was murdered, how she was murdered, where she's buried, where we can go to pay our respects.
By 2003, Dr. Lang had traced them all.
Ich hatte Angst gehabt, dass ich vielleicht Wunden aufreißen würde. Und dann hat eine Frau gesagt, Sie reißen keine Wunden auf, die Wunden sind noch offen.
Now, all 86 names are emblazoned on the memorial at the Jewish cemetery in Strasbourg.
This grass was here before it. It was here the entire time that it lasted. And now it is here and just the same. Its withered and faded yellow frailty, the existence of any grass, of all the grasses in the world, becomes absurd.
Every year, the French resistance fighters who were murdered at Natzweiler are commemorated too.
Honor and country. Next to that, ossa humiliata, humiliated bones. Two phrases in which man has tried to condense the truth of an infinite reality. What fills me with defeat now is the silence which has enshrouded our humiliated bones. Those who swore they would disinfect Europe completely turned their attention instead to other, less noble interests. So Europe emerged an invalid, fitted with glass eyes, so it wouldn't frighten good citizens with its empty sockets.
Harzungen, dass die lahko potem, kot fante, ki ima 7 let, je zame to bil konec sveta.
99 years ago on this day, the young Boris watched the building he treasured burn down. And now he returns to be honored at a special commemorative ceremony. The building has risen again, but Boris's dreams for the future of Europe never quite came true. But at least Slovenia did eventually become an independent country with its own president.
Boris Pahor, teh silovitih sprememb, ki smo jim bili priča, do osvoboditve izpod nacifašizma, ki je prinesla neko upanje, vendar je pustila za seboj razdeljeno Evropo. Ni potrebno, da zapiramo meje zato, da bi ohranili sebe, zlasti znotraj evropske družine, odpreti in paziti eden na drugega. In se mi zdi, da je živa priča vsega tega zavzemanja za pogumno, tudi ponosno lastno identiteto na eni strani in odprtost do vseh drugih identitet, da je Boris Pahor. Ravno kar sem bil pri Fidrigi. Hvala.
Osebno sem mislil, potem človek bo spremenil svoj način obravnave življenja, razmerje do drugega. Kaj smo mi doživeli? Mi smo doživeli Hirošimo in Nagasaki in potem po vojno življenje smo imeli to vojno brez orožja 20 let. Kaj je bilo to življenje, za katerega se je splašalo biti v taborišču? Ne. Tisto, kar je človeku dalo upanje, ko sem se zaljubil, sem imel zelo rad in na mene. Jaz sem začel upati v človeštvo. To je bila ljubezen. Ja, tukaj dol to je eno najlepših razgledov. A to je lep dan,